It's time now for the Success is Subjective podcast. Here is your host and therapeutic consultant for young adults only, Joanna Lilley.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I know the anxiety that comes from watching a loved one struggle with a nonlinear path. This podcast was created to fight back against the narrow picture of success painted by social media. Each week, we share authentic stories from people who changed course, failed, and ultimately found their own definition of success. These are the stories you need to hear to prove that changing your mind is common, and you don't have to have it all figured out at 18. If you're a parent or a young adult looking for a little proof, you are home. Now let's get into today's episode. And if you'd like to explore how I can help your young adult, schedule a free consultation through my website link in the show notes. Today, my guest is Ann Coleman. Ann is an attorney turned podcaster and a parent educator. After a couple of trying years with her teenage son, she finally figured out how to turn things around. For the past 8 years, she's helped thousands of other parents understand the science of parenting adolescents so they can avoid the mistakes that she made. Here's Ann. All right, Ann, I'm excited to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it.
Let's just dive right in because I know nothing about your backstory, which I'm excited to learn. So why don't you tell the listeners, where did you actually grow up and what was the messaging that you were specifically getting, whether it's from your family or kind of the community in which you were raised, about what you were supposed to be doing after high school?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I grew up in rural Alabama. And my parents did not go to college. They were very successful financially, but they were self-taught, did not go to college. It was not one of those unwritten rules that I was going to college. I always assumed I would, but my parents were also business owners. So what I did was I started out in junior college, went a couple of years, decided to open a business. With their help, opened a business, ran that for several years while I finished my degree, ended up with a bachelor's, decided to go to law school, got married in the interim, went to law school, got divorced at law school, and then started practicing law. And that was in 1995. And then had a child in 2000, practiced law off and on, not my thing, don't love it, went to law school on a whim, thought that was the thing to do. And then I just kind of worked myself out of practicing law over the past 2 to 3 years, something like that.
So you're like, maybe you would identify yourself as a recovering lawyer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. And I try not to even tell people I'm a lawyer because they always kind of go, ugh. So yeah, I kind of keep that a secret if I can.
Well, it's kind of actually interesting because I'm like totally picturing this, like you've got to be early 20s when you're already launching your own business, even with the support of your parents. So like entrepreneur while you're in college, and then you go for an advanced degree and you're just like, I'm just picturing different types of hats that you're wearing, even as a very young adult.
Right. And I loved it. I loved business, grew up around business. Like I said, my parents were in business. I always knew that would be, part of my life. And actually, I majored in business in college. But again, I did the 10-year route. I went and I drove back and forth. I never had the normal college experience because I was I opened an additional business after the first year. So yeah, I have always been an entrepreneur. That's in my blood. That's what I do. But I also loved going to law school. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. It was interesting. It was scary as all get out in the beginning, but I did enjoy it. I love the research and the intellectual part of it and the, arguing with people. That was kind of my forte. As a matter of fact, my 7th grade teacher, I was one of the kids that always got in trouble. I'm ADHD and always got in trouble for talking. They always had a seat for me right up front. After I graduated from law school, my 7th grade teacher ran into my mother at the grocery store and said, "Well, I'm so glad Ann finally found something that she can use that mouth for." So yeah, that was my reputation. I had a big mouth. And actually, my 8th grade English teacher nicknamed me Mouth of the South. So, I'll take that. It has served me well. I can talk. I'm a good talker.
Wow. Okay. So I love all of this. I wouldn't, I think it's fun to always hear like little inside stories of like nicknames or academic experiences that obviously like we still reflect back on nowadays because it's
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
wild. So, going back to what you said, even before that last little bit, you were like, I am not a practicing attorney. And in fact, I don't even let people know half the time that I'm even like educated as a lawyer. So,
Yeah.
fast forward to what it is that you're doing now. How did we go from like completely discontinuing law? Where did the journey take you leading to where you are now?
Well, in about 2017, 2018, my son went through a really tough time in high school. He has ADHD and anxiety. We adopted him at birth. So he had anxiety issues from day one. Let's just say that. He came out of the womb anxious. And so in high school, that kind of developed into some behavior issues. And because I really didn't have a grip on my own emotions about what he was going through, I made things worse. So it kind of escalated over a couple of years. He ended up in a residential treatment facility for a couple of months. And it was there finally where somebody kind of clued me in on what I was doing wrong. And so I started learning, the lawyer in me came out and I started researching the heck out of everything about adolescence and the adolescent brain. I studied adolescent neuropsychology for almost a year, started taking notes, almost basically wrote myself a book. And I started thinking really early on, if I don't know this stuff, I know a lot of other parents don't know this stuff. And I know my mistakes could be prevented. Other parents, I could help them prevent doing what I did, which I feel like, I pretty much drove the bus to get him into residential treatment. If I had known then what I know now, I believe we could have stopped that before it happened. So, I started out in about 2019 because this was late 2018 when he got out of residential, and started in 2019 studying. I took a year or two to study and to learn everything about emotions, about emotion theory, emotional intelligence, like I said, adolescent neuropsychology. I read and read and studied and studied and wrote and wrote. And then finally, I developed a framework that I teach other parents, kind of the fundamentals of these things that I've learned that will help you decrease your conflict with your teen and learn to help them with their behavior because you're learning to change your own behavior. So over the past couple of years, I just slowly kind of, as I finished off with clients, I didn't take new ones. And then I guess it's been about a year that I've just completely quit practicing law. And all I do is educate parents.
Wow. Okay, so I have to ask a very specific question because you said I'm helping parents of teens. Now, I work with young adults only,
Right.
18 and up. However,
Right.
what I find is if we're going to talk about the adolescent brain, there are some young adults that developmentally are presenting more adolescent like, and parents are really struggling with the disconnect of like, you're supposed to be an adult. Like, I'm going to treat you like an adult.
Yeah.
And yet there's a disconnect. So I see this as a front load to the question that I'm going to ask, which is the support and the like education that parents can get connected with you, does it translate to working with being a parent of a young adult? Or do you feel like it's just solely focused on kind of this adolescent brain, maybe more focused on kind of what would be perceived as high school years?
Right. Okay. Well, that's a really good question because it really, I will back up and kind of correct myself because in fact, you are an adolescent until your brain has finished developing, and which we know does not happen until you're at least in your mid to late 20s. So where I usually work with parents of kids who are 18 and under, that's usually my audience. But I also have worked with parents who have kids, 19, 20, 22, 23 years old, because all of the same applies. It is all the same. Now, as they get older, and 18 is not a magic number. And that's what I tell people all the time. Turning 18 is a legal number that, okay, now you can do X, Y, and Z. And maybe 21 is another legal milestone you might hit so that you can do X, Y, and Z legally. But it has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not they are an actual adult, which will not happen until their brain is finished. And again, mid to late 20s, sometimes 30 years old. And if they have ADHD or mental health issues of any kind, they're going to be behind 2 or 3 years in this. So yes, these same issues apply as they get older. Of course, we know their prefrontal cortex gets closer and closer to being finished. So it gets better. Their emotional dysregulation gets a little better, each year. Their ability to rein in their, have more self-control and make better decisions, that gets a little bit better every year. And you can sometimes see a marked, distinction between 17 and 19, let's say. But yes, definitely all the same applies. It just might not be that their issues are as intense as they get older, but the same applies to parents and how they communicate with, treat their children, manage their own emotions, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that really resonates for me. Everything that you said. I think one of the often distinct challenges for a parent of somebody that's over the age of 18 is if they don't live under the same roof anymore. That's where it feels like all of a sudden there's a disconnect in what parents can control. And when I say that, I mean their own experiences in what you were talking about, right? How they communicate, how they understand, and how they support. But it there's it's almost like this arbitrary, oh, they're 18 or, oh, they're out of the house. Now I'm completely helpless.
Out of the loop. Yeah,
exactly. It's like, no, you can actually be more in the loop. So, okay. Yeah. I love that.
Well, that's an interesting dynamic. What I talk about with parents a lot is their own fear for their teens and for, the issues that they're going to run into, or, oh my God, are they smoking weed? Oh my God, are they doing this? And when you have kids who aren't living under your roof anymore and they're off at college, or they've gotten their own apartment and they're working, or whatever it is, that fear can actually grow because you do feel less in control. You don't see them every day. You can't really set the rules as much as maybe you could when they were at home. So that fear can actually ramp up. And when our fear takes over, that's when we start being more controlling of our kids. That's when we start, meddling more. We start monitoring more. We, put all those parental controls out there, and that makes them rebel. When their autonomy is threatened, they push back, and it just becomes this spiral, which is exactly what happened to me and my son. So,
yeah. And I'm just picturing I imagine that the work that you do with parents is kind of going back to the image of you literally driving the bus to residential. It's like, you could still be driving the bus, but can we at least get off on an exit before we get there so that we can actually change the course and direction in which we're traveling?
Exactly. And it's so interesting that we're talking about this, because I just had a mom reach out to me this morning who listens to my podcast and was saying, her son is in psychiatric treatment right now, and they're trying to figure out what to do. And they feel like he needs more time there, but they don't know what to do when he gets out. And it gives me goosebumps, because it takes me back to, I guess it was, early 2018, when my son was in a psychiatric facility, and I was scrambling to try to figure out, do we, what residential treatment center do we send him to? Because actually I'd been told that is absolutely what you have to do. And you have to do it as soon as he gets out. There cannot be any lag time. And it ended up, we had 2 weeks of lag time, and the nerves were just off the chart. So I just so feel for these parents who are in the moment and don't know what to do, because there's not a lot of, it's not easy to pick and choose and find the information out there to feel like you are informed enough to make a decision about whether or not they should be in residential. So it's just so hard.
It is. Okay, so clearly you are an expert in, like, personally and professionally, in being like a good resource to help change the course for other parents, right? Like, learn from my lessons. Let me help you make the changes so you, as a parent listening, can stop driving the bus towards residential instead. Like, again, get off on the exit. I'm going to ask this question because you also kind of alluded to it earlier. Like, you're doing this full time now. And so, like, phased off all of your legal clients, no longer an attorney at all, doing this like all in. Do you see yourself as successful?
God, that is such a good question. I like to say that, success depends on the person, just like the name of your show. I mean, success is relative to your own experience. And so I try to tell other parents, don't have this hard and fast picture of what success is in your head about your kid. And so, I try to apply that to myself. So I make no money right now. I mean, very little, maybe a tenth of what I made as a practicing attorney. So if you went by just purely financial, I am so not successful. But I define it as success because I feel like now, rather than, what I used to do, which I was a healthcare attorney, I am helping people on a daily basis. I get real-time feedback from parents that say, oh my God, you've helped me so much. And I never got that as a practicing attorney. I mean, very rarely. Most of the time, people are just upset with their attorneys for some reason or another. So yes, this feels like my calling. It feels very successful, whether I have a dime in my business account or it's zero. I do feel successful.
So I'm going to piggyback off of that and actually ask you, as a parent of a child who went to treatment, was in treatment as a part of their adolescent experience, how has the definition or your vision of success, if it has shifted for them based on the experiences that you've collectively had? And if I need to rephrase that, I don't think that was technically grammatically correct. So if you're an English major, don't give me a hard time, people, if you're listening to this, okay.
I got it, sister. I
Thank
you. Yeah, my definition of success certainly changed regarding my son, because we had always thought, he's going to go to college. Of course he's going to go to college. He went to a private school from kindergarten through 8th grade. We moved him out because of his ADHD and all of that stuff. But it was always assumed that he would go to college. The closer and closer we got to that point, he was turning 18 as he got out of residential. I was still even hopeful that maybe he would go on to college, even though at that point we still had to get him through finished high school because it had been such a mess that year. And then it wasn't maybe 3 or 4 months that through his therapist, he informed us that he just was not interested in college. And it rocked my world, even though I knew deep down with his ADHD, he also has other learning issues and dyslexia, dysgraphia, all this stuff. I knew it would be a stretch and it would be hard, but it was one of those things that it just broke my heart. It just broke my heart. And I don't know why I had such a strong, connection to that, I guess because of all the education that I have. But so it took me probably, actually that was in the early 2019 when he said that to us. And I would say just in the past couple of years, I have kind of come to terms with the fact that success for him is going to look different than what I thought it might. And so, he has had a recent struggle again with substances. So we're dealing with that again now. But in the interim 5-6 years, whatever it was, he was a professional snowboarder. He was working in a snowboard shop. He was living his best life out in Summit County, Colorado, and just having a ball. And so I got used to the idea that, okay, he may just be successful enough to scrape by and pay his bills, but Is he happy? Yes, he's happy. Things are going well. And so, yeah, we're kind of now at that point of sort of starting again because of his recent mental health issues and struggles again with substances. But I'm also back at that place of let's see what success is for him. Let's let him decide what makes him happy. We're going to help and we're going to steer as much and guide as much as we can. But in the end, we all have to learn that it is not our life. It is their life. And they are the ones that have to decide what success looks like for them. And if that's, drawing art in the, Indies or something, drawing, native animals or whatever. Okay, that's it. That let them live their life. So yeah. I'm getting more used to the idea. So
one of the things, as you were just at the very end talking about some examples, I used to have one parent that I worked with that would always say, and it clearly has burned an impression on me. He would always say, I don't care if my son picks up trash. I just want him to do something and I want him to like what he does. And I understand. Let me also be clear in saying, like, there's nothing wrong with you working in sanitation. Like, that's a job, right? Like, come on. And yet sometimes I think kind of going back to the point of actually even, it's kind of a good segue of like, how do we get parents to connect with you? It's so important for parents to also understand that the things that they say and how they say it matters. So even though that dad kept saying, I don't care if he's, working, picking up trash, there was something about the way that he was saying it, which still felt veiled with some level of judgment. And so it was really hard for his young adult to hear that because he didn't really believe it.
Yeah, that is a really, really good point. I was just reading an article this morning about substance abusers and how they later come back, even after 10 years of being sober and, come to it was all about the holidays. They come back to holiday events and the parents still treat them as if they are actively using drugs or drinking or whatever it is. And, that reminds me of that same thing. We're saying one thing, maybe we're feeling and thinking another, and it's hard to keep that under wraps. It comes out in some way. And that's why, I work with parents so much. This is one of the main things I think is working on our own emotions and how we feel and how we think, because those thoughts lead to our emotions. So how we're thinking about our teen or ourselves or whatever it is, and, creates those emotions in us. And those emotions lead to our behavior, the things that we say, the way that we treat them, that we may not even be that aware of. And so, I tell people the mistakes that we make as parents, I believe, are always based on misunderstanding, especially the adolescent brain and how, the way adolescents behave, where those behaviors come from. We misunderstand those behaviors, and those mistakes are also based on our emotions in response to those behaviors that we misunderstand. I've had parents say, my child is such a narcissist, or they're so entitled, or they're so mean. And I'm like, but you have to understand that's what their brain is making them do right now. That's not narcissism. It is all about the self when you're an adolescent. That's all it's about. That empathy piece is not there. They're not going to remember your birthday. They're not going to hold the door open for you if you have a broken foot. That's not what they're focused on, and they can't help it. So yeah, I think just being able to wrap our heads around the fact that our kids are different from us. They are not. We have to get rid of that whole movie reel in our brain about how things were going to be or how things are supposed to be, and let things actually be. So yeah, that's my advice. And it's hard. That is really hard. But if you can do it, then you will have a much better relationship with your kid for sure.
Yep, that is, I feel like I'm not one to like promise things or guarantee anything, because we are talking about humans, but I think you just hit the nail on the head. Your relationship is guaranteed to be better and different if the parent does the work, right? Like you're saying, if they
Yep.
show up to also acknowledge, what am I thinking? How is it tied? Like, how is it tied to my emotions? And then obviously how that spills over to the interactions and thoughts
Right.
and feelings and all of it with their young adult. So, and obviously I use the language young adult, their child, period, full stop, doesn't
Yeah.
matter age.
Yep. Mine's 24 and I still call him my child. I mean, will always be my child.
Exactly. Okay, so Ann, I'm so excited, and I feel like you and I could actually probably continue this conversation for hours on end, but I'm going to end this here so that folks are interested in reaching out to you. They want more. So how do folks connect with you?
Well, I have a podcast called Speaking of Teens. It's available on all podcast apps. I also just recently started producing that podcast on YouTube at Speaking of Teens Pod. So that's probably the best place to go find me, just at the podcast. And then when you hear the podcast, you'll hear about all the other things that I've got going on.
All right, call to action. Anybody listening, reach out to Ann. Ann, thanks again for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. We want to thank our guests for joining Joanna on the show this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes, where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email Joanna at lilleyconsulting.com. Be sure to check out the lilleyconsulting.com website for additional resources outside of podcasting. Now, if you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on other popular podcast apps, such as Audible, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Thanks again for listening in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.